My name is Ava Mitchell. I am 39 years old and live in San Francisco, where I serve as the Chief Operating Officer of GreenSphere Technologies. We are a green energy startup recently valued at $500 million. I never imagined my own husband would betray me. I never thought the man who promised to love me forever would conspire with his mother and ex-girlfriend to steal my life's work. And I certainly never believed he would consider murder as a backup plan. This is the story of how I uncovered their scheme and fought to save not just my career, but my life. The morning everything changed began like any other Tuesday. I arrived at our downtown office just after 7:30. The early November fog hung over the bay as I swiped my keycard and headed to my corner office. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for Friday, and I was reviewing our latest financial projections when my phone buzzed with a text from our CEO. Marcus was requesting an urgent meeting in his office. No context, no explanation, just be there in 15 minutes. I felt a twinge of unease as I gathered my notes. Marcus and I had always had a strong working relationship. We had built GreenSphere together, from a tiny operation in his garage to one of the most promising green technology companies in California. Our innovative solar storage solutions were revolutionizing how communities access sustainable energy. When I entered his office, Marcus looked uncomfortable. He avoided eye contact and gestured for me to sit down. He began speaking in an apologetic tone. The board had been discussing restructuring. They felt we needed to bring in a more experienced COO to prepare for our initial public offering next year. Someone with previous IPO experience. I was being reassigned to lead the project management team. My salary would remain intact, but my stock options would be frozen. I sat there stunned. Our last 3 quarters had exceeded projections by 12%. I had personally secured our latest round of funding that valued us at $500 million. This made no sense. I tried to argue my case, but Marcus seemed resolute. The decision had already been made. I would transition to my new role by the end of the month. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with questions. Who would replace me? Why now, when we were doing so well? What would this mean for my career? I had given 7 years to GreenSphere. My ownership stake represented the bulk of my net worth. Having those options frozen meant potentially losing millions. Our home in Pacific Heights usually felt like a sanctuary. The Victorian craftsman, with its bay windows and hand-carved details, had been a labor of love for Luke and me. Today it felt like a foreign space as I walked through the door at 5:15. I placed my keys on the marble entryway table and heard Luke call out from his home office. My husband, Luke Mitchell, is 41 years old. He runs a boutique architectural firm specializing in sustainable luxury homes. We met at a green building conference 8 years ago. His passion for environmentally conscious design perfectly complemented my work in renewable energy. We were married within 18 months. I found him at his drafting table working on designs for his latest project, Evergreen Estates, a development of luxury micro homes in Nevada that promise minimal environmental impact with maximum comfort. Luke looked up and smiled, but his expression changed when he saw my face. I told him what happened at work: the demotion, the frozen options, the sudden restructuring that made no sense. I expected outrage on my behalf, support, a strategy session on how to fight this. Instead, Luke seemed oddly calm. He suggested that perhaps this was for the best, that maybe the pressure of being COO had been too much, that I could focus on the technical aspects I loved without the administrative burden. His response felt wrong. Luke had always been my biggest cheerleader, the one who pushed me to ask for the COO position in the first place. Now he was practically congratulating me on this devastating career setback. I felt a distance opening between us that I could not explain. That night I couldn't sleep. While Luke snored softly beside me, I replayed our conversation. Something about his reaction nagged at me. It was too rehearsed, too convenient. I slipped out of bed and went to my home office. I needed to understand the details of what was happening with my stock options. If they were frozen instead of canceled, there had to be specific terms. I spent hours reviewing my employment contract and stock agreement. Nothing indicated the board could unilaterally freeze vested options. I had already vested 70% of my shares based on my time with the company. Those shares were worth approximately $22 million at the latest valuation. They could stop future vesting, but they could not touch what I had already earned, unless there was something I was missing. The next morning, I called Marcus directly and pressed for more details. His answers were vague and inconsistent. He seemed uncomfortable with my specific questions about the stock options. When I mentioned speaking with the corporate attorney, he quickly backtracked. He said there must have been a misunderstanding. No decisions had been finalized. We would discuss everything at the board meeting on Friday. His reaction confirmed my suspicions. Something wasn't right. I decided to keep the information about my supposed emotion between Luke and me until I understood what was really happening. I told him I was meeting with Marcus again and that things might work out after all. Luke seemed strangely disappointed by this news. That evening, Luke mentioned he would be meeting his mother Eleanor for dinner. Eleanor Mitchell is 67 years old and had moved to San Francisco 3 years ago after Luke's father passed away. She had never particularly warmed to me despite my efforts. She was from old money and had never approved of Luke marrying someone who she considered new money, someone who had built their wealth rather than inherited it. With Luke out for the evening, I decided to do something I had never done before. I went into his home office and began looking through his files. I felt guilty violating his privacy, but something told me I needed answers. After searching through his desk, I found nothing unusual. I was about to give up when I noticed his laptop was still logged in. I hesitated only briefly before opening his email. I scrolled through his inbox looking for anything related to GreenSphere or my position. Nothing stood out until I saw an email thread with a subject line that made my blood run cold. Delaware Docusen completed. The sender was Madison Clark. Madison Clark is 38 years old and a successful real estate broker. She was also Luke's college girlfriend. They had dated for 5 years before breaking up shortly before Luke and I met. I had only met her twice at industry events. Luke had always insisted they remain casual friends through mutual college connections. I opened the email thread and began reading. What I discovered made me physically ill. Attached was a completed durable power of attorney document filed in Delaware, a document with my forged signature that gave Luke complete control over my financial affairs, including my GreenSphere stock options. The document had been notarized and filed the previous week. The thread included previous messages discussing how they would use my shares as collateral for a $25 million bridge loan. The loan would save Luke's Evergreen Estates project, which was apparently in serious financial trouble. According to the emails, the project needed immediate funding or the entire development would collapse by January 10, 2026, less than 2 months away. Madison was facilitating the loan through her connections at Coastal Financial Partners. Eleanor was mentioned repeatedly as the one who had arranged for the document to be processed in Delaware, where apparently the verification process was less stringent. The three of them had created a complex paper trail to make it appear legitimate. I felt the room spinning as I continued reading. In another email thread between Luke and his mother, there was a discussion about increasing my life insurance policy. Eleanor had already added a $5 million rider to my existing coverage. There was disturbing talk about our upcoming New Year ski trip to Tahoe. Eleanor suggested that accidents happen on ski trips all the time. Luke had not explicitly agreed, but he hadn't objected either. They were not just planning to steal my company shares. They were discussing the possibility of killing me. The people I had trusted most in the world were conspiring against me. My husband of 6 years, my mother-in-law who had spent holidays in our home, and a woman I barely knew, who apparently still held enough influence over my husband to involve him in fraud and possibly murder. I forced myself to remain calm. I needed evidence. I took photos of the emails with my phone. I forwarded copies to my personal email account. I downloaded the power of attorney document and examined it carefully. The signature was convincing, but it was definitely not mine. I never used my middle initial in signatures, and this one did. It was a small detail, but significant. I carefully returned everything as I had found it. Then I went to the bathroom and was violently ill. When I could finally stand, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale and my hands were shaking. I looked like a stranger to myself. How had I missed the signs that my husband was capable of this level of betrayal? The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, to plan. The board meeting was still 2 days away. I doubted there was any actual restructuring happening. The story about my demotion was likely a test. Luke was gauging my reaction to see how I would respond to losing control of my shares. If I accepted the demotion without question, it would make their plan easier to execute. I needed help, but I had to be careful who I trusted. Many of our friends were connected to Luke through his business. I considered calling my parents, but they lived in Chicago and I did not want to worry them until I had a concrete plan. I needed someone with technical expertise who could help me understand how to fight this. I remembered Zoe Kim. She is 27 years old and works as a cybersecurity analyst at GreenSphere. We had worked together on strengthening our company's digital infrastructure. Zoe was brilliant and discreet. She had no connection to Luke or his social circle. I sent her a text asking if we could meet privately off company property. We met at a small coffee shop in the Mission District, the kind of place neither Luke nor anyone from his firm would frequent. When Zoe arrived, I was already on my second cup of coffee. My nerves were frayed and I had barely slept. I asked if she could secure our conversation. She nodded and placed a small device on the table that would prevent anyone from eavesdropping electronically. I told her everything: the forged power of attorney, the plan to use my shares as loan collateral, the life insurance policy, the disturbing emails about our ski trip. As I spoke, her expression shifted from concern to shock to determination. When I finished, she did not question whether I might be overreacting or misinterpreting things. She simply asked what I needed from her. I explained that I needed to understand how to invalidate the power of attorney, how to track the loan process, how to secure digital evidence that would stand up in court. Most importantly, I needed to do all of this without alerting Luke or his accomplices. Zoe listened carefully and began outlining a plan. First, we needed to verify the Delaware filing. Zoe had a contact in the Delaware Secretary of State's office who could discreetly check the records. Next, we needed to secure my financial accounts before Luke could access them. Then we needed to document the forgery with a handwriting expert who could testify if necessary. Finally, we needed to monitor Luke's communications to stay one step ahead of their plans. Over the next 3 days, Zoe and I worked methodically. We confirmed that the power of attorney had indeed been filed in Delaware on November 12th. We froze my personal accounts and created new ones at a different bank. I visited a handwriting analyst who documented the discrepancies in the forged signature, and Zoe helped me install monitoring software on our home network that would alert me to any communications about the loan or about me. The board meeting on Friday came and went with no mention of restructuring or changing my role. Marcus seemed genuinely confused when I casually asked about the supposed plans to bring in a new COO. His reaction confirmed what I already knew. There had never been any legitimate company decision to demote me. It had all been part of Luke's test. At home, I maintained a facade of normalcy. I told Luke the situation at work had been a misunderstanding, just a proposal that had been floated but not seriously considered. He seemed relieved, which I now recognized as concern that his plan might be facing obstacles. I suggested we confirm our Tahoe vacation plans for New Year's Eve. He eagerly agreed and mentioned that his mother might join us for part of the trip. The thought of spending time in an isolated cabin with the two people who had discussed my accidental death made me physically sick. But I needed to maintain the illusion that I suspected nothing while Zoe and I gathered more evidence and formulated our counter strategy. Through Zoe's network, we located the financial institution handling the bridge loan. Coastal Financial Partners was indeed processing a $25 million loan with my GreenSphere shares listed as collateral. The loan was scheduled to fund on December 28th, just 3 days before our company's year-end audit. The timing was not coincidental. Luke and his partners knew that the annual audit would reveal any unauthorized use of my shares. They were planning to secure the funding just before the discovery would become inevitable. By then, the money would be transferred to accounts for the Evergreen Estates project and would be difficult to recover. As we dug deeper, we discovered that Luke's development was in far worse shape than I had realized. He had mismanaged funds severely. Early investors were threatening lawsuits. Contractors had walked off the job due to non-payment. The entire project was a house of cards on the verge of collapse. Luke was desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Through the monitoring software, we discovered that Madison was not just helping with the loan. She was romantically involved with Luke. They had apparently rekindled their relationship over a year ago. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined. While I was working late hours to build GreenSphere, Luke was meeting his ex-girlfriend in hotels across the city. Eleanor's role was perhaps the most disturbing. The emails between her and Luke revealed a woman who had always resented me, who viewed me as an obstacle to her son's happiness, who had suggested the plan to use my shares in the first place. In one particularly chilling message, she wrote that once the loan funded, they could decide whether to keep me around or implement the contingency plan. The contingency plan involving my increased life insurance policy. With 2 weeks left before the loan was scheduled to fund, we finalized our counter strategy. First, I met privately with Marcus and the company's legal counsel. I shared evidence of the forged power of attorney and the unauthorized loan application using my shares as collateral. They were horrified and immediately began the process to alert the Securities and Exchange Commission and file fraud reports. Next, I worked with the company's attorneys to send cease and desist letters to Coastal Financial Partners. We provided evidence of the fraud and warned of severe legal consequences if they proceeded with the loan. Within 24 hours, they had frozen the application process and launched their own internal investigation. Then I contacted a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. She helped document the connections between Luke Madison and Eleanor. The phone records, the bank transfers, the hotel meetings, everything that would establish a clear conspiracy. Finally, I secured a temporary restraining order against all 3 conspirators. The court sealed the records to prevent them from being tipped off. The restraining order would only be served if they made any move to proceed with their plan or if I felt physically threatened. As Christmas approached, Luke became increasingly agitated. His phone calls with Madison and Eleanor grew more frequent and more frantic. Through our monitoring, we learned that investors in Evergreen Estates were demanding answers by the end of the year. Without the bridge loan, the entire project would default and Luke would face potential bankruptcy and legal action. I maintained my performance as the unsuspecting wife. I bought Christmas gifts. I attended holiday parties on Luke's arm. I discussed our upcoming ski trip, all while watching him grow more desperate with each passing day. The weight of the deception was exhausting, but I knew I needed to see this through. Not just for my financial security, but for justice. On December 23rd, I received an alert from Zoe. Madison had contacted another lender, a less reputable firm that asked fewer questions. They were attempting to restructure the loan with different collateral but still using my forged power of attorney as the foundation. They were getting sloppy in their desperation. I decided it was time to confront Luke. Not with everything I knew, but enough to gauge his reaction. That evening, as we decorated our Christmas tree, I casually mentioned that GreenSphere's legal team had discovered some unusual activity regarding my stock options. Someone had attempted to use them as loan collateral. The company was investigating what appeared to be fraud. Luke dropped the ornament he was holding. It shattered on our hardwood floor. His face drained of color. He quickly tried to compose himself and asked what I meant. Who would do such a thing? I explained that the details were confidential during the investigation, but that the SEC was now involved due to the seriousness of the fraud attempt. He excused himself and went upstairs. Through the monitoring software, I watched him immediately call Eleanor in a panic. He spoke in hushed tones, but the recording captured every word. They needed to accelerate their timeline. The contingency plan might be their only option now. Eleanor told him to calm down, to stick to the plan, to take me to Tahoe as scheduled. She would make arrangements to join us there. That night, I lay awake beside the man I had once loved. The man who was now discussing with his mother the possibility of staging my fatal accident. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: heartbreak at the death of my marriage, rage at the betrayal, fear for my physical safety, but most prominently a steely resolve that they would not succeed. The next morning, I told Luke I needed to go into the office to deal with the fraud situation. Instead, I met with Detective Sarah Chen of the Financial Crimes Division. I provided all the evidence we had gathered: the forged documents, the recorded conversations, the email trails, everything pointing to conspiracy fraud and potentially conspiracy to commit murder. Detective Chen assured me they had more than enough to proceed with arrests, but suggested we might gather more conclusive evidence if we allowed the conspirators to continue operating while under surveillance. I agreed, but with one condition: I would not go to Tahoe. I would not put myself in physical danger to entrap them. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were surreal. Luke and I exchanged gifts. We hosted his mother for Christmas dinner. We video called my parents in Chicago. All while I knew that federal agents were monitoring our every conversation. All while I carried a panic button connected directly to the police department. All while I slept in our guest bedroom with the door locked. On December 27th, everything came to a head. Luke received word that the second lender had also frozen the loan application after being contacted by the SEC. In desperation, Madison and Eleanor met at our home while they thought I was at work. Thanks to the monitoring devices we had installed, I was able to listen to their entire conversation from a secure location. They were frantic. The development project was 48 hours from complete collapse. Investors were threatening criminal charges for misappropriation of funds. Madison's reputation in real estate was on the line. Eleanor had apparently contributed a significant portion of her retirement savings to the project. They were discussing increasingly desperate options. Eleanor suggested they focus entirely on the contingency plan now. If I had an accident, the life insurance would provide enough to at least pay back the primary investors. Luke seemed hesitant, but did not outright refuse. Madison suggested they could still try to access my accounts directly if they could get my passwords. They were spiraling into increasingly criminal territory. I had heard enough. I contacted Detective Chen and gave the go-ahead for the arrests. Within an hour, police officers arrived at our home with warrants for all three conspirators. I watched from down the street as they were led away in handcuffs. Luke looked directly at me as he was placed in the police car. His expression shifted from shock to understanding. He knew I had uncovered everything. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. All three were charged with multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted insurance fraud with implied intent to harm. Madison's real estate license was immediately suspended. Eleanor's assets were frozen. Luke's architectural firm collapsed as clients fled the scandal. The evidence was overwhelming. Facing decades in prison, all three began negotiating plea deals and turning on each other. Madison claimed the forgery had been Eleanor's idea. Eleanor insisted she never seriously intended for me to be harmed. Luke claimed he had been manipulated by both women. Their united conspiracy devolved into mutual recrimination. Greensphere weathered the storm remarkably well. Marcus and the board took immediate steps to strengthen governance and protection of executive equity. My role as COO was publicly reaffirmed with additional authority over financial controls. Our year-end audit on December 31st proceeded without issue, confirming that my shares remained secure. I filed for divorce on January 2, 2026. The proceedings were expedited given the criminal charges against Luke. The court had no difficulty determining that his actions constituted extreme financial malice, which invalidated our prenuptial agreement's protections. I was awarded our home and a significant portion of our joint assets. The criminal cases moved forward with surprising speed. All three eventually accepted plea arrangements. Luke received 8 years for his central role in the conspiracy. Eleanor received 5 years, which at her age might effectively be a life sentence. Madison received 3 years plus permanent revocation of her real estate license. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding not just my career, which had actually emerged stronger, but my sense of trust and security. I sold our home, unable to live in a space filled with so many memories of betrayal. I purchased a loft in a secure building downtown and renovated it to my own specifications. A fresh start in a space that was entirely mine. Zoe Kim became much more than a colleague who had helped me through a crisis. She became a trusted friend. Her technical brilliance had saved my career and possibly my life. GreenSphere recognized her contributions by promoting her to Chief Information Security Officer with a substantial equity package of her own. The most difficult healing came from recognizing the red flags I had missed. Luke's increasing secrecy about financial matters, his renewed friendship with Madison that he had downplayed, his mother's subtle undermining comments about my career. The signs had been there, but I had been too trusting to busy building our company to see the danger developing in my own home. 1 year after the arrests, GreenSphere completed its initial public offering. The company was valued at $1.2 billion. My shares, now worth over $70 million, were finally truly secure. At the celebration party, Marcus raised a toast, not just to our business success, but to perseverance and justice. Many in the room did not know the full story, but Zoe caught my eye across the crowd and raised her glass with a knowing smile. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had not discovered their plan, if I had trusted Luke's explanation about my supposed demotion, if I had gone to Tahoe for that New Year's ski trip. Would I have suffered an unfortunate accident on the slopes? Would Luke and Eleanor have collected the insurance money while pretending to mourn? Would Madison have eventually moved into the home I had lovingly decorated? These thoughts do not keep me awake anymore. I have learned that while trust is valuable, verification is essential. I have learned that family is not always defined by marriage or blood, but sometimes by who stands beside you in your darkest moments. I have learned that my worth is not determined by those who sought to exploit me, but by the strength with which I defended what was mine. My name is Ava Mitchell. I am 40 years old. I am the Chief Operating Officer of a publicly traded green energy company. I uncovered a conspiracy against me led by my husband, his mother, and his ex-girlfriend. I stopped their $25 million fraud scheme, and I rebuilt my life on my own terms. Have you ever wondered who in your life would stand by you if everything was at stake? And more importantly, have you considered what you would do if those closest to you betrayed your trust? Sometimes the most important lesson is learning your own strength in the face of betrayal.